1942, Kersey, Colorado. The wind had a mean whistle to it that morning, like it carried old curses in its teeth. It came howling through the cottonwoods along the South Platte, rattling loose boards and tossing up yellow dust that settled into the creases of Evelyn Carter's coat. She walked slow down the dirt road, leading away from the train station, shoulders hunched, one suitcase in her hand, a baby on her hip. The other three clung to her skirts, quiet as shadows. She had nowhere left to go. The man at the grain elevator hadn't even let her finish her sentence before shaking his head and turning away. Same with the grocery. Same with the lady at the church who wouldn't look her in the eye. 4 mouths, not in times like these, they said without saying it. The town was hard but not cruel, just tired. It had seen too much war, too many droughts, and too many people like Evelyn, thin, desperate, asking for something when they had nothing to give back. There was no charity left here, only survival. Her boots crunched in the gravel. She'd walked almost 3 miles by the time the road curved out past the town and into the wheat fields where the wind moved in long silver waves. The suitcase grew heavier with each step. The baby whimpered. Her own hunger burned in her belly, but she didn't show it. Couldn't. She hadn't eaten since the morning before. There was a little rise in the land just past a ditch where the grass grew up high and wild. She crossed it and stopped, set the suitcase down, then the baby, and lowered herself to the ground. The children gathered near, wordless and pale. Their clothes still held the scent of the train, coal smoke and metal. She drew her knees to her chest and pressed her forehead against them. Closed her eyes. A single thought beat inside her skull like a hammer you don't get to break down. Not now. She thought of the house she'd left behind in Kansas, of her husband's silence the morning he'd gone and never come back. No note. Just his belt gone from the hook and the truck missing from the drive. There'd been whispers after. A waitress in Topeka. A card game turned bad. Evelyn didn't care anymore. What mattered was the silence, the weight she carried now alone. A diesel truck rumbled up the road. She didn't lift her head. It slowed, stopped. Boots hit the dirt and a man's voice, not unkind, called out, "You all right there, miss?" She raised her head but said nothing. Her mouth felt dry as cotton. He stepped closer. Big man, wide shoulders, dust-covered hat pulled low. His face looked carved, more than grown, weathered by sun and work. "Don't mean to scare you," he said. "Just saw the little ones, figured maybe someone needed a ride." She nodded, once guarded. The children stared up at him like little deer. "I got a ranch out west a ways," he went on, nodding toward the truck. "Name's Luke Halstead. Was heading back with supplies. If you need somewhere warm for the night, well." She stood slow, picked up the baby, then the suitcase. Didn't answer, just started walking toward the truck. He didn't try to help, just walked beside her, matching her pace. The kids climbed in first. She followed. The warmth hit her like a wave and her throat tightened. She fought it down. He climbed into the driver's seat, turned the key. The truck rumbled to life. They drove a long way without speaking. Finally, just before the road turned toward the foothills, he asked it, "What can you do?" It wasn't cruel, wasn't suspicious, just curious, like he wanted to know what parts of her hadn't broken. She glanced sideways at him. "I can cook," she said. "Clean. Fix what's torn. I can read. Count. I work fast. I don't complain." She paused. "I can hold 4 children in my arms and still chop firewood." He gave a quiet nod. "That'll do," he said. They didn't speak again the rest of the way. When the ranch finally came into view, low buildings set against the sweep of snowy mountains, it felt like a place she'd dreamed once years ago and forgotten. She didn't let herself hope. Not yet. But she watched the light in the windows and listened to the wind whistle through the wire fences, and she held her children tighter as if maybe, just maybe, this was a place she could make something again, even if it was only herself. The bunkhouse wasn't much, 2 rooms, cracked windows, an old stove in the corner, but it was dry and warmer than anything they'd known in weeks. Luke handed her a ring of keys, said the water pump was out back, and left them alone without asking questions. She sat on the edge of the cot that first night, the baby asleep against her chest, the others curled together beneath a quilt that smelled of cedar and smoke. She watched their small shoulders rise and fall. The silence in the room was heavy but not cold. Her hands trembled, slow and quiet. Sleep didn't come. In the dark, her mind looped through the months behind her, the pawned wedding band, the worn shoes too small for her oldest boy, the days she begged bread off the back steps of churches and was sent away with tight smiles and tighter hearts. She had done what she had to, told lies, bartered dignity for calories, suffered the sideways looks, carried the shame in her spine like a steel rod. Now she sat in a stranger's bunkhouse with no money, no friends, and no promise beyond morning chores. Still, it was the first time in a long while she wasn't afraid someone might take her children from her while she slept. The next day she woke before the sun, moved quiet, tied her hair back with a piece of string, and stepped outside where the frost clung to every blade of grass like glass. The air smelled of animals and wood smoke and the sharp metallic bite of dawn. She found Luke in the barn, shoulders deep in feed sacks. "Tell me where to start," she said. He didn't blink. "You know horses." She hesitated. "Not much." "Cattle." "Less." "Then we start with chickens," he said. He showed her how to rake out the co-op, how to hold the feed bucket just high enough to keep the birds from swarming. She listened close, watched his hands. He worked without waste, every movement purposeful. He didn't talk more than he needed to, but he wasn't unkind. When she stumbled, he didn't correct her harshly. Just stepped in, showed her again, and stepped back. They worked in tandem for most of the day. The children stayed close by, gathering eggs in a basket and whispering to the goats through the slat. At one point, her youngest boy fell in the mud and cried until Luke handed him a peeled carrot and said, "Ain't no shame in getting dirty, son. World's full of worse things." Evelyn couldn't remember the last time someone spoke to her children like they were worth something. By dusk she was bone-tired and sore in every joint, but a steady kind of tired, earned, honest. She didn't expect Luke to bring them dinner, but he did, a pot of stew thick with potato and venison still steaming. Left it on the stoop with half a loaf of bread and a folded note. "Tomorrow, if you're willing, we'll fix the fence out near the orchard." That was all. She held the note in her hands a long time before she set it down beside the empty bowls. Later, after the children had fallen asleep again, she stepped outside. The stars overhead were brighter than she remembered stars could be. The wind had gone still. The night was quiet except for the lowing of cattle somewhere far off. She didn't cry. Not quite. But the tight knot in her chest loosened enough to let air in. Inside, one of the children murmured in sleep. She went back in, pulled the blanket up tighter around their shoulders, and sat near the stove until the red glow turned to ash. Something had shifted. Not much. Not loud. But she felt it. A place to work. A roof. A man who didn't flinch at her story or scold her children for being hungry. She still didn't trust it. Not yet. But maybe it didn't have to be trust. Maybe just one day at a time would be enough. Subscribe and let the frontier keep talking. The fence near the orchard ran crooked along a stretch of land where the earth sloped just enough to feel like it was trying to shrug it off. It had been patched and repatched with rusted wire and borrowed boards, and it leaned like a tired man. Evelyn stood there with a hammer in one hand and a mouthful of cold wind. Luke pointed toward a rotted post near the middle. "That one's the worst. If we don't fix it, the cows'll figure it out and we'll spend the whole week chasing 'em." He handed her a glove that was missing a finger. She pulled it on anyway. They worked in silence, the kind that didn't feel strained. She held the post while he drove it into the ground. When the wire slipped, she steadied it. When her grip failed, he caught it without comment. Once she noticed a deep scar running along the base of his thumb. Looked like it had been there a long time. She didn't ask. He didn't offer. Around noon, he sat down beneath the twisted apple tree that marked the edge of the orchard and opened a tin of bean. He passed it to her first. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. "My brother used to call this kind cowboy caviar," he said, not quite smiling. "You have a brother." Had. He reached for the tin. "Fell off a roof in '81. Went fast, at least." She nodded. There was no right thing to say. But the way he said it, matter-of-fact, no self-pity, made her feel like maybe grief didn't always have to be a hole. Maybe it could be just another weight you carried, like a fence post or a sack of feed. He didn't ask about her husband. He never did. Instead, he talked about the land. How it had come to him piecemeal after his father passed. How the orchard used to be full before the frost came hard 3 springs in a row. How he'd nearly sold the place 5 times but hadn't. "Didn't know where else I'd go," he said. "Some things just stick to your bones." She understood that. When they finished eating, they got back to work. Her arms ached. Her fingers blistered. But she didn't complain. That night, back in the bunkhouse, she found her oldest boy sitting up with a torn book in his lap, mouthing the words, slowly tracing each line with his finger. "Where'd you get that?" she asked soft. "Mr. Halstead gave it to me," he said. "Said there's a whole shelf in the house. Said I could borrow more." She knelt beside him and turned the page. "Did you say thank you?" He nodded. She kissed the top of his head. The next morning, Luke brought her a second coat. "Too small for me," he said, shrugging. "Figured you could use it." She took it. "Thank you." He rubbed the back of his neck. "You've been good help." That was all he said, but it settled in her chest like warmth. The days began to fall into a rhythm. Work at sunup, rest at noon, supper, quiet but shared. The children followed Luke like he was some tall, gentle tree they could lean against. He showed them how to hold a feed bucket, how to rub a horse's nose so it calmed. Evelyn watched all of it with a strange ache in her throat. One evening, after the littlest had fallen asleep, Evelyn stayed behind and helped Luke close up the barn. He didn't ask her to. She just did. When the last latch was fastened and the tools hung, she turned to go, but paused. "Why'd you stop for us that day?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "Then saw your boy wave at the truck. Just a little thing, barely moved his hand. Reminded me of someone. That's all." She waited, thinking maybe he'd say more. But he didn't. He tipped his hat. "Sleep well." She watched him walk off toward the house, tall and quiet, under the wide sweep of stars, and felt something open in her, not joy exactly, but a loosening like the thaw of ice. A life was not a thing you found. It was a thing you built, one board at a time, with your hands blistered and your heart unsure. She turned toward the bunkhouse, the door faintly lit from within, and she let herself hope just a little. By spring the valley had softened. Snow retreated up the hills and green crept into the fields like breath returning to a long sleeping body. The orchard's bare trees stood taller, still skeletal, but holding promise. The hens laid steady now. Calves had come late in February, and Evelyn had been there for 3 of them, kneeling in straw with her sleeves rolled up, steady and calm, just as Luke had shown her. They were working in rhythm now. She rose before a light boiled coffee, strong, and had biscuits in the pan before the youngest even stirred. The bunkhouse no longer smelled like coal smoke and old shoes. It smelled like soap. like warm bread, like living. She had started reading again. Borrowed the books Luke offered, old ones, mostly westerns and farm almanacs, but she read them anyway, her lips moving just a little as she went. The children read too. They fought less, laughed more. Sometimes Luke brought little things for them, an old harmonica, a rusted pocket-knife, a tin whistle that squeaked when the youngest tried to blow it. She thanked him for everything, but it was never enough. Not really. He'd given them more than a bunk and food. He'd given them a way to keep standing. Still no one in town quite looked her in the eye. Some women in the feed store crossed the street when she came near. She saw the looks, heard the low mutters behind hands. Took up with a rancher just like that. Heard she ran off her husband. Heard those kids ain't even his. Heard she was on the street. Luke never asked what they said, but she knew he heard it. He just kept on same as before. Fence. Road. Hauled. Quiet. Steady. But something had shifted. One night she found him sitting on the porch steps smoking. She stood behind him for a moment, unsure. "They say I'm sleeping in your house," she said. "Say the kids call you Daddy now." He didn't turn. "Do they?" "No," she said. Then quieter, "But they might." Still he said nothing. She came and sat beside him. They watched the stars pull thin light across the dark. He didn't touch her. He never had. But sometimes she caught him watching her, not like a man with desire, but like someone studying something precious and breakable. "I don't want to ruin what you have here," she said. His jaw moved once. Then again. "You didn't." He flicked the cigarette into the dirt and pressed it out with his boot. "I was here working this land, eating alone, speaking only when I had to. People respected me, sure. But they didn't really know me. They didn't ask." He paused. "You did." A long silence passed between them. The only sound was a nightbird calling far off. Then he stood. "Come on. Kids'll worry." She followed. The days warmed. Work got harder in a different way. Mending fence in heat that clung to skin. Calves that wandered. The pump broke twice. Then came news from Topeka. A letter. Hand-delivered by a deputy from the next town over. Her name in harsh letters across the front. It was from her husband. Not dead. Not lost. He wanted the children. Said she'd abandoned him. Claimed he had family now. A home. Claimed she had no right to keep them hidden. She read the words once, standing under the cottonwood near the pump, then folded it small and shoved it in her apron pocket. Luke found her there, white-faced and still. "You all right?" She handed him the letter. He read it slow, then read it again. His face didn't change much, but his hands did tighten, then stilled. "Is he telling the truth?" he asked. She shook her head. He left. No word. No money. No food. I waited until the snow melted, then I took what I could carry and got on a train. Luke looked at the dirt for a long time, then said, "You'll need someone on your side." She didn't ask what he meant. She already knew. They were no longer two people who happened to be surviving in the same place. They were something else now. She felt it in the way he stepped closer, just enough that she could feel the heat from him, in the way his voice softened low and sure. "I won't let him take them," he said. She hadn't realized how much she needed to hear that. She nodded once. He didn't touch her. Not yet. But in that moment she would let him. The lawyer came from Greeley in a truck too clean for country roads. He wore a pressed suit and a look like he'd already made up his mind. They sat at Luke's kitchen table. Evelyn wore her only good blouse, hair pulled back, hands folded so tight her knuckles ached. Luke sat beside her, silent as stone, one arm resting on the table like he was bracing against a blow. The man pulled out a folder. spread papers across the table. "Mr. Carter's filed for custody," he said. "Claims you left without cause, that you're unfit, that the children are his." "He left," she said, voice steady. "I waited 3 months. He never sent a dime. Do you have proof of that?" She shook her head. The lawyer sighed through his nose. "Then it becomes his word against yours. Unless—" he glanced at Luke, measured him, "unless Mr. Halstead can testify to the children's welfare. Or, if there's a legal relationship between you two." Evelyn's stomach dropped. Luke didn't flinch. "Explain," he said. The man shrugged. "If you were married formally, legally, it would give her standing. A home. Stability. Judges like that." No one spoke. The wind shifted outside, slapping the porch door against its frame. Somewhere in the distance, a cow bellowed. Evelyn stared down at the table. Her heart beat so hard it felt like it was echoing in her ears. She'd been someone's wife before. Worn the ring. Said the vows. She'd known what it was to hand yourself over to someone who turned away. She wasn't sure she could survive doing it again. She stood. "I need air." Luke didn't follow. She stepped outside. The children were in the orchard, chasing each other between the trees. Laughing. Free. They didn't know what the paper inside meant, what it threatened. She leaned her hands against the railing and stared out across the land. It was Luke's land. His name on the deed. His house. His barn. His hands that had built and fixed and carried. But it was her children's laughter in the trees. Her biscuits in the kitchen. Her stitching in the curtains. Her life, too. Luke came out after a time. Didn't say anything. Just stood beside her. "I'm not asking you," he said. She turned her head. "I'm not asking you to marry me out of fear," he went on. "Or out of duty. I'm not offering a name like it's something to fix you." She said nothing. "I've watched you," he said softer now. "Watched you carry more than any woman should. Watched you raise those kids without bitterness. I'd marry you today, tomorrow, or not at all. Just say the word. But whatever happens with that man, you're not facing him alone." She stared at him, noticed the flecks of gray in his beard, the way the sun lined his face, the cut on his knuckle from the fence wire yesterday. He wasn't offering rescue. He was offering his presence. There was a difference. She reached for his hand, held it firm and certain. "You'd marry a woman with 4 kids, she said, a past and a broken heart." "I'd be proud to," he said. And then for the first time since she'd stepped off that train, Evelyn Carter let herself want something. Really want it. Not just survival. Not just shelter. A life. With this man. On this land. And so they married. It was quiet. The children wore clean clothes. She wore a borrowed dress. The preacher from town read the words plain and slow, and when he asked if they promised to stand together, Evelyn said yes with no tremble in her voice. Luke looked at her like she was made of something strong, something sacred, and when he kissed her it felt like coming home. The lawyer filed the paperwork 2 days later, and the next time a letter came from Kansas it came through official channels, and it was met with a letter in return signed Mrs. Evelyn Halstead. She didn't know how the court would rule, but for the first time in her life she wasn't bracing for the worst. She was standing beside someone who would stand beside her, no matter what came next. The hearing was set for late June. They borrowed a truck with good tires and made the drive to the courthouse in Greeley in pressed clothes and silence. The children stayed behind with the neighbor girl who watched calves in spring. Evelyn watched the plains roll past the window, wide and golden, stretching all the way to the mountains. The sun was fierce and high. Her palms were damp. Luke drove without rush. one hand on the wheel, the other resting loose on his knee. Every now and then he'd glance over, not with worry, just to remind her he was still there. They arrived an hour early and waited on a bench outside the courtroom. Her former husband, arrived 5 minutes before the gavel dropped. He looked older, his face, puffy hair gone thin. He wore a suit he didn't know how to fit, the shoulders too tight, the tie crooked. But his smile was still the same, smug, hollow. He didn't look at the children's photos on the table, didn't ask how they were, just sat down with his lawyer and passed her a wink. She stared straight ahead. The judge was a woman, gray hair in a tight bun. No smile. Both sides spoke. Papers were passed. Stories told. The other man said Evelyn left out of spite. Said she poisoned the kids against him. Claimed she'd shacked up with a stranger using the children as leverage. Luke spoke next. His voice was calm, steady. He told them how he met Evelyn, what he'd seen, what she'd done on his ranch, how the children had thrived under her care, how she rose before the sun, read to her kids each night, and taught his household how to laugh again. She didn't come here broken, he said. She came here burning. And she kept burning. That kind of fire, you don't see it twice. When it was Evelyn's turn, her voice shook at first, but she told the truth, in plain, clear words. She told them how she'd waited, how she'd fed her children salt and hot water when there was nothing else, how she'd walked town to town until someone finally asked her what she could do instead of what she'd done. She told them she was no saint, but she was a mother, and she had not stopped being one, not even in the darkest parts. When it ended, the judge said she would consider. They drove home with the windows down. The sky was turning pink by the time they saw the outline of the ranch. Evelyn let the wind tangle her hair and didn't reach for her scarf. Luke pulled into the drive, killed the engine. They sat there a moment. Then he reached across the seat, covered her hand with his. "You did good," he said. She looked at him. "I'm not sure it'll matter." "It matters to me." She didn't cry. Not quite. But her chest felt tight and full in a way she hadn't let herself feel in years. 2 weeks later, a letter came. The custody was denied. Full guardianship was awarded to Evelyn Halstead, with the court recognizing Luke as a legal co-guardian by marriage and shared residence. She read the letter twice, standing barefoot in the doorway, the smell of coffee and summer dust in the air. She handed it to Luke without a word. He read it once, folded it, and tucked it in his back pocket. Then he reached for her. They didn't speak, just held each other, standing there in the morning light while one of the kids called for breakfast. The days that followed felt different, though little changed. She still rose early, still packed lunches, still wiped mud from small boots and sorted beans from grain. But she smiled more now, laughed quicker. Luke built a shelf for her books, carved her name into the side so small she almost didn't see it. She planted sunflowers near the porch. The children began to call him Pa without anyone asking them to. They began to speak of next year, of Christmas, of someday, and Evelyn, who had once walked with her head down and her jaw clenched against the world, lifted her face to the sky more often now. Let the sun touch her. Let herself be seen. Let herself belong. By the time fall rolled in, the orchard had begun to bear again. Not much, just a few stunted apples clinging to crooked branches, but Evelyn picked them anyway. She filled a basket with what she could find and boiled them down with cinnamon and a little sugar, the kind you scrape from the bottom of an old jar. Luke came in late from the barn that night, smelled the pie on the stove, and just stood there in the doorway, watching her move about the kitchen like he'd never seen anything sweeter. He set his hat on the peg. "Smells like something worth staying alive for." She looked up from the counter. "Might be." They ate together with the children crowded around the table, fighting over crust and asking for second. Afterward, Evelyn sat on the porch with her knitting while Luke tuned the old radio in the window, catching some war report out of London, crackling and thin. The world kept turning out there, spinning with trouble. But the ranch stood steady. That night, after the children had been tucked into their bunks and the house had gone quiet, Luke came to her, slow, asking nothing, giving everything. They did not speak vows again. They didn't need to.